All right, everybody. So I announced maybe a month ago on Instagram that for the first time in 10 years, I would be working with a coach. And here is that reveal. So welcome my new coach, Steve Hall.
It should be called like Stevie Mon. I'm that the if you do the Pokemon reveal.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Actually, I feel just very quickly like completely honored to have that position as like being your coach for. I know you, Dave, and to hear that you haven't had a coach like for a decade.
Mhm.
I know it's some kind of trust and investment into
Yeah.
something, and hopefully exciting. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm honored to be here and be called coach.
Yeah, and like I know a lot of people were asking, like why did I have a coach? Like what was I trying to get out of it? And I made a post listing like why I think there are good reasons to have a coach, why somebody would do that. And so you got to think like so this video I largely wanted to have Steve here just as I explain this and explain to him, explain to you guys, and then also get his input on like kind of where we're going to go with this. But for me, obviously I've been coaching people for a long time. I mean, like unofficially, even since high school, I was helping people. So you're talking over a decade of actually coaching people, and I've worked with a lot of people, and I am very happy with the results that I get clients. So then, it's kind of like, well, then why do you need a coach? But if you look at some of like the best people, and certainly I'm not like the best athlete, but if you look at those people, they have coaches, right? I mean, even before John Meadows passed, he and Scott Stevenson kind of like coached each other, gave each other input and things like that. And if you look at the progress I've made, actually just recently I hit a lifetime pull-up PR and I posted that. I was really happy with that. Last year I hit a lifetime overhead press PR, but the PR is literally like a 1 rep PR in 2 years. I mean, that's the level of progress at this point. And so part of it is to give me something to be motivated for, something to do, when you're 18 years into it or 16 years officially like into it, there is something to be said for the motivation factor. And as I explained to Steve, I've literally been doing the same workouts for 2 years, maybe changed like, the rep range or something a little bit, but it's basically been the same. And so when nothing is really happening, even if your goals are maybe it's like a different type of goal that you're setting, but it gives you something to do. Another thing is that, in terms of picking Steve specifically, Steve and I first got introduced actually when I first started the podcast. I reached out because he's had the Revive Stronger podcast. And I don't know if you remember Steve, but I said, what you should do is get Scott Stevenson on with some of these like 3DMJ guys. And then eventually I was like, well, I'm just going to do it myself, but at that time, I didn't know much about Steve, but there was a little bit of an aspect of me of like, well, I've been doing this even longer than Steve. And so there was, I think when you are new to the space or you meet somebody new, there's an aspect of like a comparison almost, right? Whether that's healthy or not. I think there is that little bit. And I've actually been pretty impressed with you, Steve, because I've seen, I think for a while, it was kind of like, you're almost like the Renaissance periodization guy, right? Like, yes, you have Revive Stronger, but there was so much attachment to that. And something I've talked with, other people we both know is that you have kind of grown outside of just that stuff yourself. And even on our last podcast, some of the conclusions that I think maybe some of the RP guys talk about, like when cutting, things that they would do with their exercise selection while cutting, you've kind of made your own conclusions based on that. And one of the reasons that I would I wouldn't say respect you more than other coaches necessarily or inherently, but just that when you are natural and you've been doing this for so long naturally, what you find works, like, it's because of what you've done for the most part, right? Not just this outside factor. And really no shade on people who use performance enhancing drugs at all. It's just that it really, I think, muddies the water in terms of the conclusions you can make. When you have such a powerful factor and then you say, well, look at this other thing I did that's like 1/10 as important. I think the conclusions you make are oftentimes inaccurate, frankly. And so seeing some of the progress you've been making over the last 3 years, and even after you've already been lifting for so long, was something that I thought was really important in a coach. And that trust in a coach is so important because there's frankly not a lot of people I would let coach me. I just either I wouldn't like credit their intelligence enough or their conclusions. And I would say Eric Helms and Scott Stevenson are probably two of the only other people I would let coach me. But you've had this podcast yourself for now, what, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I think when we launched it was like 2015, maybe. So yeah, it's coming on like
Okay.
5 years.
Yeah. Wow. And so inherently, like, you're going to know a ton just because like we've talked to a lot of the same people, right? We've read the same things. You're going to know a ton. So there's no part of me that's like, does this guy know what he's talking about or anything? Like all that, we pretty much know a lot of the same things. And I think you probably have an objective eye there of like, even me, I try not to make too many emotional decisions with my training and nutrition. But at the end of the day, sometimes that happens. And to just what I told Steve in our private conversation before was like, this is going to be an experiment of just fully giving up the reins. Like, like treat me almost not like a beginner, obviously, in how we're going to style the training, but assume like I don't know anything, basically. Just because to me, it's like there was somebody asked me on a podcast I was on, and they were like, but like, do you think that you could still get more out of it? And I like not knowing my whole history of, everything, because they'd see me as kind of like minimalist. And it's like, well, that's only recently because nothing happens anymore. But I said, just for almost fun, it's like, if you want me to eat X number of times a day, if you want to like, whatever it is, whatever training, I told Steve, you want to give me double sessions, if you want to, whatever, like this is a 100% hypertrophy focused period. And minimum 3 months. I think really you need even more than that to really be able to see something. And just kind of like go into it, because I have done more of a power building, I guess you could say, approach for a long time. So I don't know if you want to jump in there with anything, Steve, in terms of like what you think. And obviously you have to be comfortable with how much you're giving away about your own coaching, but just in terms of what you think would be some of the things we would attack it or change based on what I've been doing.
No, yeah, really cool to hear kind of more of your thought process behind kind of picking up a coach and why specifically myself. And I can only like have myself nodding along in terms of like having, it doesn't have to necessarily be a coach, but certainly having at least someone in your corner you can really communicate with and kind of go over your decision making with, because it's hard to put your coaching hat on. And it's surprising. I guess it makes sense why I end up coaching so many coaches. Like the majority of people I coach are online coaches or personal trainers themselves. And so they know loads. And that was kind of scary at first, actually, because I'm like, what, like you already know kind of what I know or what have you. But the amount of times I've been able to help people kind of get out of their own way has been surprising to me. So I'm excited to possibly do that with you. And I'm just kind of really happy to see how open-minded you're also being, because I know we have some differences potentially in opinion and how we might program. And so maybe we'll find something there that is kind of a middle ground that does end up working for you, because like you said, things haven't been kind of shifting in the direction you want. And all we can do is try. And that's always what I do with my clients. And I'm sure you're the same, Dave. Like you have their best interests at heart, just trying to get to the ultimate answer for them. You kind of have to hedge your bets towards what you think is going to work based off your experience and based off the data. And I think for you, you kind of drew it back to you're committing to hypertrophy for this period of time. That is my ultimate kind of draw with yourself, is like specificity is number one. Every part of your program, I'm like exercise selection through to set number, through to kind of rep range, everything we're doing is targeting hypertrophy specifically, and just kind of as best as we can within your lifestyle constraints, dot every I, cross every T. So we can both say, like, you gave your everything towards what I would consider would be the ultimate specificity towards hypertrophy to grow muscle. Let's see what happens there. And like you said, 3 months minimum. And I think it, unfortunately for people like us, it does take a long commitment. So it's very challenging. I think sometimes that's what it is for people. Like they just don't give long enough to a certain protocol. So but we should see some things and hopefully learn your body better. And I'm excited about that kind of discovery process and how we're going to go about things. And there's going to be some big shifts in programming, because obviously you're quite minimalist, quite high intensity, lower volume. And I prefer a kind of slightly lower relative intensity, possibly higher volumes, higher frequencies, particularly for things like delts. That's something I can definitely say is going to be different. And I'm excited to see how you experience that and how you could get on with it, and what the result is.
Were you surprised by how minimal my training was? Like, did you see that and kind of like roll your eyes?
I didn't roll my eyes, but I was surprised, a little bit surprised, maybe less so because you're dieting. So I think your volume is probably a little lower. Maybe your volume goes higher during mass phases. But yeah, to see, no, it doesn't. One times a week legs was like a bit of a like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, in our initial call, I said to Steve, and I was like, yeah, so like I don't want to train legs. And I just stopped. And like obviously I was being sarcastic, but it was so like not even a real idea in his head. He was waiting for me to like finish the sentence, like not how many times a week, just no, I just don't want to train legs, just blank stare at me. So
like men's physique split.
right, exactly. Well, that is one of the things too, because if you look at like my routine, it's, as I said to people before, 6 sets to failure per week, and they are very hard sets, and like back it's a little bit more, but that's pretty much it. And I would say some areas that I still have a bit of an ego with certain lifts, mainly overhead press, bench, and pull-ups. And so like, one thing I even mentioned to Steve is like, maybe I just won't even do barbell bench again, because it's hard for me to even have that exercise in and not think about my past performance. Like I used to bench in the mid 300s. And so like to then take that down and use such a small portion of the weight and focus on form is just harder for me compared to like a newer exercise that I don't really care or have an ego about. And that's one thing. And then even in terms of like the volume, one of the things that I like about this plan and working with you is that I've had numerous clients that have come from different camps. Obviously a lot of clients they try out different coaches. And so I'm sure it's happened with all of us, right? But I think as much as I've tried everything under the sun in terms of high volume, low volume frequencies and whatever, there are certain things that I've actually really not done. And like, it gives me a better idea of your method. And again, somewhat like the RP method of focusing on like your soreness, your pump. How did you like feel during the session? One thing I've not done a ton of in the past is auto regulating. So like I've done different routines, I've done different volumes, but that will be a learning curve for me, even in terms of like, how do I feel based on this mesocycle? And does that then indicate to me to go up in volume? Because that's not something that I have really even like preached myself. And so at the very least, it gives me more of an idea of that method. And my thought was like, rather than try to implement that method, I'm just going to go straight to the source. And that's kind of where it comes, like, just tell me exactly what you want me to do based on how the sets looked, whether we do like a video or my description to you. So I think, as you mentioned, if nothing else, it will be fun to kind of try that out and have an even more concrete opinion of it.
Yeah, I always look at a coach is like a walkthrough guide to like a console game. So it just gets you from A to B way more effectively and quicker versus like, it can be fun on a self-discovery process. But if you've been trying to play the game for a long time, you haven't got to the end, or you can't beat that boss, maybe a coach or the handbook can help you get through that. And yeah, definitely in terms of those, especially those things you talked about there, they're definitely lesser priorities. But for someone, or at least for me, and I would say you're at a similar level, they have been a big game changer for me in terms of actually knowing that I'm getting the stimulus from my training that I want, knowing I've got all the prerequisites of sufficient volume, sufficient relative intensity, good technique, good exercise selection. When I then got those little like almost biofeedback tools in check, they definitely helped. And I saw a difference in my physique. And yeah, sometimes you do have to take yourself away from the ego and the numbers. You need them there always, because you have to be progressing something. The numbers have to go up at some point. But sometimes, or at least what I found, was through this method of accumulation of kind of volume and things, I'd kind of be surprised when I hit a PR, and I wouldn't necessarily be shooting for it. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, rather than kind of chasing that PR all the time, be like, I've got to beat this. It's just a case of work with an amount that's giving me the stimulus for growth. And suddenly I'm able to work with a weight for a number of reps and sets that I never was able to be using before. And it's like, nice.
Yeah. And that it will be one of the most interesting things to me, because I am really not used to holding back. And not that like every set is all out failure, but every workout has a set per body part that's being worked to all out failure. So like maybe it would be, I don't do a ton of straight sets, but maybe it would be 3 straight sets, but that last one is like all out. So to end a workout where I'm like 3 reps in reserve, it's gonna be a learning curve for me for sure. And it'll be interesting to see because that was always my thing, is like, well, I'm looking for progression. I just felt this need to go further. So that'll be very interesting. And I guess just like some closing points there. Some people have asked, am I going to document this? And I would say, certainly to some degree, I'm going to document it. Obviously, I don't want to like reveal any specifics that Steve wouldn't be comfortable with me revealing. But one thing to consider is I can document my experience and how I feel about it. But in terms of results, as we said, it's going to be a process. I mean, what I said to Steve is, so I'm like 180. I cut down to 180. I think we will, over some period of time, go up to my heavier weights again. Maybe not like heavy, but in the 190s. And my goal will be to see, is this a better version than before at all? I mean, even an eighth of an inch on my arms would be significant at this point, because it's a measurement I've taken literally hundreds of times in my life. And so because we're at such an advanced stage here, we will be able to determine if there are differences. And if I get to, let's say, 195 and I compare it to my last 195, and I have an eighth of an inch on my arms more, or an eighth of an inch less on my waistline, consistently over measurements, I would consider that a success. So we're not going to see like, wow, look at this new pack. Like, that's just unrealistic, So unless, Steve wants to send me some of those legal UK performance enhancers, but not over here. So
up the dose.
Right, exactly. So that's the one thing. And then also I did have a few people, which I was surprised and not surprised by this, which is like, oh, like, do you think that's going to hurt your own coaching in terms of, I guess, like they meant like business or something, which again, one, I think that's a really flawed mindset if you do think that like anybody who has a coach can't be a good coach themselves. And secondly, it really kind of just seems ridiculous to me. But also, we do kind of work with different people. I mean, like, I'm not training competitors to get on a stage. And you've mentioned yourself, you work with a lot of coaches. I would say I work with mainly beginner to intermediate, and then maybe like intermediate advanced, but it's a lot more your lay people, normal people. I get a lot of satisfaction working with that population, because I think I can tweak some things and really get them a lot of results compared to what they were doing before. But we do kind of work with, and not that you don't work with lay people, obviously, but I'd say we do work with slightly different people. And even if we worked with the exact same people, I just think it's a really unproductive mindset to think that just because somebody is coaching that or needs a coach, that they wouldn't themselves also coach. So
I think it's very similar to even like being on like sometimes people might think, oh, you're a podcast host and you just listen to these experts because you don't know anything. It's like,
yeah.
To have the discussion with them, you have to know a lot.
Right. Yeah.
and like learning from them. So I think it's even a credit to you to experience more from another outside perspective and a coach. And so, yeah, and we do work with different people. Right. I do tend to work with mostly kind of intermediate to advanced, and people who are like, this is their jam. Like, exactly. This is everything to them. They love it. They're engrossed. Right. Whereas, yeah, not too many Gen Pop, some. But yeah, it's a bit different. But I'm with you. I don't see it as a detriment in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it kind of highlights you as someone very open-minded and learning.
Yeah, sure. All right. So, I mean, that was most of my thoughts on it. Like I said, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of come here for the little announcement. And I'm psyched, man. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on it, but I think it'll be, like I said, at the very least, it's getting me more excited for training than I've been in years. So that alone is already worth it for me.
Everyone just, I don't know, big up Dave. And I'm excited for the journey and like to take the helm a little bit, but also interact and drive up hopefully some new muscle tissue.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thanks.